In the summer of 2015, a pediatrician named Mona Hanna Atisha sat in her office at Hurley Medical Center in Flint, Michigan, staring at blood test results that made her physically sick. The numbers on those pages told her something that she could barely bring herself to believe. The children of Flint, Michigan had elevated levels of lead in their blood. Not a few children. Not an isolated case. Thousands of children across an entire city were being poisoned. And the government knew. They had known for over a year, and they had done nothing. They had actually tried to hide it. What happened in Flint, Michigan, is one of the most catastrophic government failures in American history. But the poisoning of Flint's water was not where this story begins. It was not even the worst thing that ever happened to this city. To understand what Flint truly lost, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when this small Michigan city was the most important automobile city on Earth. Back to when working in Flint meant you had made it. Back to when the American dream was not just a phrase, but an actual lived experience on these streets. Before we continue, less than 5% of viewers are subscribed. If you believe in history hidden secrets, hit that subscribe button right now. Flint sits in the middle of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, about 60 miles north of Detroit. There is nothing particularly special about its geography. No great river, no natural harbor, no strategic crossroads that made it inevitable. Flint became what it became not because of where it was, but because of what the people who built it were willing to do. In the beginning, Flint was a fur trading post. Jacob Smith established a trading operation here in the early 1800s, exchanging with the Native American communities who had lived along the Flint River for generations. When Michigan became a state in 1837, Flint was incorporated as a village, still small, still unremarkable. Then came the lumber. Michigan in the mid-1800s was covered with some of the most dense and valuable forests in North America. White pines stretched from horizon to horizon, and Flint sat right in the middle of it. The Flint River gave lumber companies a way to float logs downstream to sawmills. Within decades, Flint had become one of the most productive lumber cities in the country. The money was extraordinary. Lumber barons built mansions. Workers flooded in from across the country and from Canada and Europe. Flint grew fast and grew loud and grew rich, but everyone knew it could not last. The forests were being consumed faster than anyone could imagine. By the 1880s, what had seemed like an inexhaustible resource was running out. The lumber industry was moving north and west, following the remaining trees. Flint faced a choice that many resource-dependent cities have faced: adapt or die. Flint adapted. The lumber industry had left behind something valuable beyond the money it generated. It had left behind skilled craftsmen, men who knew how to work with wood, how to measure precisely, how to build structures that were both strong and lightweight. And in the 1880s and 1890s, those skills translated perfectly into a new industry that was just beginning to emerge: carriage making. Horse-drawn carriages required exactly the skills that Flint's lumber workers possessed. Within a few years of the lumber industry's decline, Flint had become one of the leading carriage manufacturing centers in America. Companies sprouted everywhere. Workers who had been cutting trees were now crafting elegant vehicles for wealthy buyers across the country. By 1900, Flint was producing more horse-drawn carriages than any other city in America. It had reinvented itself completely in less than 2 decades. And then the automobile arrived. William Durant was a Flint Carriage Company executive who saw what the automobile could become before almost anyone else did. While other businessmen dismissed the horseless carriage as a novelty for rich eccentrics, Durant recognized it as the future of transportation. In 1904, Durant took over a struggling automobile company called Buick. He moved it to Flint. And he began building cars with the same organizational genius he had used to build his carriage empire. Buick became one of the most successful early automobile manufacturers in America, and the profits from Buick gave Durant the capital to dream even bigger. In 1908, William Durant founded General Motors, right here in Flint, Michigan. Let that sink in for a moment. The largest automobile company in the world, a company that would define American industrial power for most of the 20th century, was born in Flint, not in Detroit, not in Chicago, not in New York, in Flint. The implications were transformational. Factories went up across the city with breathtaking speed: Buick, Chevrolet, AC spark plug, Fisher body. Durant built an industrial empire that employed tens of thousands of Flint workers within just a few years. The city that had reinvented itself from fur trading to lumber to carriages had now made its most important transformation of all. Workers came from everywhere, from the American South, from Poland and Hungary and Russia and Italy, black families from Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, seeking to escape the brutality of Jim Crow and find work in the northern factories. They all came to Flint because Flint had something that was becoming increasingly rare in early 20th century America: good jobs, real jobs, jobs that paid wages a family could actually live on. By the 1920s, the wages at Flint's auto plants were among the highest for industrial workers anywhere in the country. A man with no college education, no special connections, nothing but his willingness to work, could come to Flint and build a middle-class life, could buy a house, could send his children to school, could retire with dignity. That was not a small thing. That was the American dream made real, made concrete, made available to ordinary people in a way that changed their lives and the lives of their children and their children's children. The population reflected the opportunity. In 1900, Flint had fewer than 14,000 residents. By 1920, over 90,000. By 1930, over 150,000. By 1960, the city reached its peak of nearly 200,000 people. But something else happened in Flint that shaped American history in ways that are still felt today. In December 1936, workers at General Motors plants in Flint sat down. They did not walk out on strike. They sat down inside the factories, and they refused to leave. The Flint sit-down strike lasted 44 days. Workers slept on the factory floors. Their families brought food to the gates. The governor of Michigan refused to use the National Guard to remove them. General Motors, the most powerful corporation in America, could not dislodge them. On February 11, 1937, General Motors signed an agreement recognizing the United Auto Workers Union. It was one of the most significant labor victories in American history. The strike that began in Flint helped establish the right of workers across America to organize and bargain collectively. The middle class that defined post-World War II American prosperity was built on the foundation laid in those Flint factories during those 44 days. The decades that followed were Flint's golden age. Workers earned wages that seemed almost miraculous compared to what their parents had known. They bought homes in neighborhoods that were clean and safe and full of children. They joined bowling leagues and attended church and sent their kids to schools that actually worked. The city invested in parks and libraries and public facilities that reflected genuine civic pride. General Motors took care of Flint, or at least that was how it seemed. The company and the city were so intertwined that they were essentially the same organism. What was good for GM was good for Flint. And for decades, GM was very good indeed. Then the world changed. The 1970s brought oil shocks that Americans had never experienced before. Gas prices exploded. Lines stretched around the block at filling stations. And suddenly, the large American cars that GM had built its empire on seemed like relics of a more innocent age. Japanese automakers had been building smaller, more fuel-efficient cars for years. Honda and Toyota arrived in the American market at exactly the right moment. American consumers who had never considered buying a foreign car suddenly found themselves in dealerships looking at Hondas and Toyotas and Datsuns. GM was caught flat-footed. The company that had dominated the American automobile market for generations struggled to compete with competitors who had built their businesses around efficiency and quality. The response from GM was not to invest more in Flint, it was to invest less. Automation began replacing workers. New plants were built in other states and other countries where labor was cheaper and unions were weaker. The factories that had employed 200,000 workers in Flint began laying people off in waves that seemed never to end. Roger and me. The Michael Moore documentary, released in 1989, captured what was happening to Flint with brutal honesty. Moore, himself a Flint native, followed GM chairman Roger Smith trying to get an explanation for why the company was abandoning the city that had made it great. Smith was never accessible. The workers losing their homes were very accessible. The contrast was devastating. By the time the documentary was released, Flint had already lost tens of thousands of jobs, but the worst was still ahead. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, plant after plant closed. The Buick City complex, once employing over 28,000 workers, shut down in 1999. The AC Spark Plug plant, the Fisher body plants. One by one, the industrial landmarks that had defined Flint for nearly a century went dark and silent. The population collapse mirrored the job collapse. From a peak of nearly 200,000 people, Flint fell to 160,000 by 1980, then to 140,000, then to 120,000. By 2010, fewer than 102,000 people lived in Flint. The decline continued. Poverty engulfed the city. Neighborhoods that had been working-class paragons of stability became desperate, dangerous, and abandoned. Houses were left behind because they were worth less than nothing. The city demolished thousands of structures because maintaining them cost more than any benefit they provided. And then came the water. In 2014, facing a budget crisis driven by population loss and collapsing tax revenue, state-appointed emergency managers decided to switch Flint's water source. Instead of purchasing treated water from Detroit, they would use the Flint River while a new pipeline was being constructed. The problem was immediately apparent to anyone who paid attention. The Flint River was known to be highly corrosive. Engineers warned that without proper treatment, the acidic water would leach lead from the aging pipes that carried water into Flint's homes. Those warnings were ignored. Within weeks of the switch, residents began complaining. The water smelled wrong, it tasted wrong, it looked wrong, sometimes coming out of taps with a visible brownish tinge. Children developed rashes, people fell ill. General Motors noticed that the water was corroding engine parts at its remaining Flint facility and switched to a different water source for its factory. The people of Flint were not given the same option. For over a year, state officials insisted the water was safe. They dismissed concerns. They attacked the credibility of residents who complained. They manipulated data. Internal emails that later became public showed officials who knew the water was dangerous, continuing to tell the public it was safe. Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha ran the blood tests on Flint's children herself. She found what the government had been hiding. Lead levels in children's blood had doubled, and in some zip codes tripled since the water switch. She went public with her findings. The state attacked her credibility. Officials said she was causing unnecessary panic. They questioned her data. She was right. They were wrong. And they knew it. The water crisis became national news. The images of Flint residents carrying jugs of bottled water, of children who might face lifelong cognitive effects from lead poisoning, of a government that had poisoned its own citizens and then tried to cover it up, shocked the conscience of the country. Lead poisoning in children is not a temporary condition. Lead damages the developing brain in ways that cannot be undone. Children who were poisoned in Flint in 2014 and 2015 will carry those effects for the rest of their lives. The full consequences of what was done to these children will not be known for decades. The government response was slow, inadequate, and riddled with bureaucratic failure. Federal emergency assistance eventually arrived. Bottled water was distributed. Pipe replacement programs began, though they took years to complete. Criminal charges were filed against officials, though many of those cases were later dropped or resolved without significant accountability. Flint residents learned the hardest lesson about what happens when a city loses its economic power. When you are wealthy and influential, the government protects you. When you are poor and powerless, the government can poison you and then argue about whose fault it is for years while your children suffer. The population of Flint today sits around 80,000 people, from a peak of nearly 200,000. More than half the city's people are gone. But the people who remain are something remarkable. They organized in the face of government failure. Community activists like Leanne Walters, a mother who first raised alarms about the water, became national figures in the fight for clean water and government accountability. The residents of Flint demonstrated that ordinary people, armed with determination and the truth, could expose government corruption at the highest levels. Flint has received promises of renewal and reinvestment. Some new businesses have arrived. The downtown area has seen some development. Kettering University and the University of Michigan Flint provide educational anchors in a city that desperately needs them. The pipe replacement program has been largely completed. Officials say the water is now safe. Many Flint residents remain skeptical, and honestly, that skepticism is completely earned. The Flint Water Crisis exposed something that was already visible to anyone paying attention. American cities that lose their industrial base do not just lose jobs. They lose everything. They lose their ability to maintain infrastructure. They lose their political influence. They lose their capacity to protect their own residents from harm. The same forces that closed the factories also created the conditions for the water crisis. Poverty, declining tax base, state takeover that removed democratic accountability. Emergency managers accountable to state officials rather than local residents making decisions that devastated those residents. Flint's story is ultimately about what America does to places and people it no longer finds economically useful. The city that built the cars that defined the American century was discarded when those cars stopped being as profitable. The workers who built the middle class through their labor and their organizing were left behind when corporate priorities shifted. William Durant founded General Motors in Flint. The company made hundreds of billions of dollars over more than a century. And when it left behind a city with poisoned water and poisoned children and streets full of abandoned houses. That is not an accident. That is a choice. The children of Flint did not choose to be poisoned. The workers of Flint did not choose to be abandoned. The residents who remain did not choose to be forgotten, but they are still there, still fighting, still demanding that their city and their children matter. The Flint River still flows through the city. The same river that poisoned children. The same river that floated lumber logs 150 years ago. It does not know what was done in its name. It just keeps moving. Flint keeps moving too. Slowly, painfully, with justified anger and remarkable resilience. This city built the American dream on an assembly line. It deserves better than what it received. Its children deserve better. And until America reckons honestly with what happened here and why and who was responsible, the story of Flint is not finished. It is just waiting for a chapter that finally gets it right.